Hello again. I'm Melissa, and Jenny Knack is with me. We're Parents Against Santa Susana Field Lab. We've got so many new people here today. I would love to meet you all. Normally, we go around and say introductions, but we've got quite a few people in here and quite a lot to get through. So, if you would introduce yourself in the chat, I would be delighted. Today, we're going to go through just a quick review of Boeing's cleanup agreements. We're going to talk about the Corrective Measure Study that Boeing published last winter. Many of you probably know that the Santa Susana Field Lab, again, just a real quick primer, is one of California's most toxic and radioactive sites, and it is owned by three responsible parties: Boeing, NASA, and the Department of Energy. Today, we are focusing on Boeing. Boeing's cleanup is over 80% of the Santa Susana Field Lab property. Boeing's cleanup is it's a train wreck. We're going to get into that. And most importantly, Boeing's cleanup is starting this summer. So back all the way in 2007, Boeing, NASA, and the Department of Energy all signed an agreement with the California Department Toxic Substances Control. You're going to hear me say, and Jenny say a lot, DTSC. And I apologize in advance for all the acronyms. It is acronym hell dealing with this whole issue. They agreed all the way back in 2007, all three responsible parties, which, by the way, a responsible party means they're paying for the cleanup, they would remediate the site to match Ventura County's open zoning, which is really important. That sets it for a very high cleanup standard because so much of the area around the Santa Susana Field Lab is small farms, people, living off the grid, eating backyard garden produce, playing in the dirt. There's a lot of reasons why that should have been a sufficient cleanup agreement. It would be done by 2017. I think we're all aware that that has not happened. And a permanent groundwater remedy was to be in place. I don't talk about it in this video, but in the 101 video, we talk about the water easement that Boeing will never clean the groundwater. In 2015, Boeing said, well, they'd do a suburban residential cleanup. And we're going to look at the risk-based cleanup levels here in a second. And you'll see that, yeah, it wasn't great. It wasn't a great cleanup, but it was okay. But by 2017, they completely reversed course and said they would do an incredibly less protective recreational cleanup. Well, 2022, Boeing has a settlement agreement. Spoiler alert, it's terrible. And what they do is they tell everybody they're still doing a residential with garden cleanup, but they changed all the formulas and all the numbers. So they're calling it a residential with garden cleanup right now, but actually it's a very, very dangerous cleanup. This is what a risk-based cleanup looks like. So most cleanups done in America are called risk-based cleanups. And what that is they are calculating how much contamination can a person be exposed to before they get sick and die. And they base that on a lot of receptors, a lot of ways that people could be, interacting with the soil. So for example, if it's a commercial site, they assume that a person's just there for 8 hours. They're probably not digging in the dirt. If it's a little retail shop, they're not picking the fruit, they're not farming. So they justify a lesser cleanup because they assume the people there won't have as much exposure. You can see the residential with 100% garden. That's what we want. That is a great cleanup. Agriculture, even stronger. It means that enough contamination has been taken out of the soil and groundwater that if you were to grow, so many of us out here have orange trees. I tore mine out, but because it scared me to eat the produce. That's another story. That if you were to grow produce in your yard, you could eat it and not get cancer from it. That's a very thorough cleanup. However, you see the recreational all the way to the left is it's a very dangerous cleanup because they assume people aren't going to be there very much except to recreate, to just hike a few hours a few times a month. So you can see there's a spectrum here of cleanup agreements. Recreational, leave in place. Those are very dangerous. They leave almost all the contamination in place. Residential with garden, agricultural, opposite side of the spectrum. Very thorough cleanups. I just wanted to point out that by 2010, all the people who had fought for the cleanup realized that the 2007 agreement had too many loopholes. And even though it was written in good faith, it was it was not going to get the cleanup that would be actually health protective. So they came up with a new plan for a more stringent cleanup. Boeing refused to sign it, would not sign it. NASA and Department of Energy, however, did sign it, and there's something called a background cleanup. So a background cleanup is brilliant. As far as we know, it's the only cleanup agreement of its type on the books where it said if there's contamination, instead of going through this whole study of how much can you be exposed and what age you are when you're exposed, of how much cancer you'll get, but like it throws that out, and it's data driven. It says if you test the soil and it has man-made contamination, you clean it up, which it's really straightforward, it's simplified, it's fair. Again, data driven instead of having calculations and all these ideas that the polluters can really use to their advantage. But again, Boeing refused to sign that because Boeing, from the beginning, has not wanted to clean up the Santa Susana Field Lab. They have not put the community's health and well-being and our environment, they have not made that their priority from the beginning. I'm not going to go into all these right now, but we'll have the slides available for you. Also, this will be on YouTube. You can take some time, but we just want to show you again and again and again. Since 2010, the Boeing company has tried to get out of this cleanup. And they've done some truly deceitful, underhanded things that show their commitment is to their stockholders. Their commitment is to profit. It is not to the people. It is not to our environment. Um, and I think it's just important that we see all these years of them trying to get away from this cleanup. It'll help put in context because sometimes it just seems like the things we're going to talk about are so bad, they almost seem unbelievable. But when we see the history of, yeah, this is the way Boeing does cleanups. This is the way they deal with people and our lives and our children and our families and community. It helps us to realize that, yeah, this is really happening. Can you define PEIR?
Programmatic Environmental Investigation Report,
Impact report.
Impact Report. So the PEIR is an environmental document that needs to be conducted before a cleanup plan can be decided upon or implemented. And this was huge for us because we knew that we wanted the background cleanup, but we were aware that the use of exemptions was in the works. If you're not familiar with the map of Santa Susana Field Lab, we're looking at it, and the Boeing areas that we are specifically talking about tonight are 1 and 3, and the southern buffer, which is the big part along the bottom. Is that how you would explain it, Melissa?
Yeah, pretty much anything red, teal, and I love that you said mustard. You're so right about that. That they're not cleaning it up. Even in some of these highly contaminated areas. In 2015, Boeing published a risk assessment. In some parts of Boeing's property, they were so toxic that 96 out of 100 people would get cancer. 96 out of 100 people. That is insane, especially compared to the highest range of EPA's acceptable excess cancer rates, which is 1 person in a million should get cancer after cleanup. What Boeing is showing here is all the places they're not going to clean up, even though that type of toxicity exists at the Santa Susana field.
So if we're just looking at biological exemptions, the only areas that Boeing wants to remediate are the areas that are gray and crosshatched. And if you look at Boeing's areas, that doesn't leave a whole lot of land.
No.
You can see in DOE's areas and in NASA's areas, maybe a little bit more, but Boeing is responsible for 80% of the site. And so you can just see straight off the bat, when they did the PEIR, they were planning on remediating very, very little of their.
we're going to talk
parcel.
more about these exemptions a little bit, but the biological and the cultural exemptions are because the site has endangered species, sensitive species, and cultural resources from the indigenous people are at the Santa Susana Field Lab. The original cleanup agreements had exemptions to protect them. They said if mitigation measures were insufficient, if there was no way that you could clean it up and not destroy it permanently, which these are irreplaceable, endangered species and cultural artifacts, well, then you would have permission to not clean up that area. But that idea wasn't to put it across the whole thing.
Go to the
Yeah.
next slide. Show them the next
And
one.
we'll talk about them more, but that's where the basis of these exemptions is coming from. And we will show you how that just violates common sense. This is another ploy to get out of the cleanup, just like that big long list we saw of all the ways Boeing has tried to get out of the cleanup before. Now they're pretty much applying it full site. Some people assume erroneously that the Santa Susana Field Lab is going to clean up the entire 2,850 acres. And that has been put forward by these irresponsible parties who want us in the community to be afraid of the cleanup. We call that a scare tactic, right? That they put out these terrible stories that the mountains are going to get pulled down. This isn't a mountain cleanup. This is a soil cleanup. They put it, oh, we're going to have to go to bedrock across the entire 2,850 acres. That is completely false. Parents Against Santa Susana Field Lab wants a background cleanup. That is the most comprehensive cleanup available with the technology that exists today. But you can see, even with a background cleanup, it's not the whole site. Look at Area 4. That's where most of the radioactive material exists right now, which again, it is loose in the soil and in the groundwater. It's not buried in vaults. It's not contained in a building. This is fallout from the spills, the leaks, the explosions, the meltdowns, the fires, open air burn pits for decades. That spread the contamination into the soil and the groundwater, right? So that means that's very mobile. That's why it's so dangerous to people living in the communities nearby. So, okay, and then we see a lot of chemical contamination here. We see Boeing's area. This is what it looks like after they apply all those exemptions. And these are only biological exemptions. Do you see the difference? That's a full cleanup. That's an exempted cleanup. It's less than half. Some people said, well, we should compromise with Boeing, but I'll tell you what, that is not a compromise. That is reckless. That is truly, truly reckless. And again, that's because Boeing is trying to save hundreds of millions of dollars on their cleanup. That's their idea of a good cleanup. It has nothing to do with health risk. It has nothing to do with protecting groundwater, protecting wildlife. It is completely cost analysis, and we will go through that in a minute. And that's not fair. I'll tell you real quick, personal story. My daughter's a two-time cancer survivor. If we're just going to be talking about money, if we're not even going to be talking about the value of people's lives, if we just want to talk about money, her cancer treatment cost almost $2 million. We have over 100 kids in the community who've been diagnosed with cancer that we know of, right? This is not them saving money. It's about transferring the cost to the people. And we're paying for it not only with money, but we are literally paying with our lives, with our families, the threat of our community is being torn apart because of Boeing's greed, because they do not want to pay for a full cleanup.
So not only are the responsible parties or Boeing specifically using biological and cultural exemptions or exceptions to try to not remediate parcels of land at SSFL. They're doing some fancy science math stuff with these multipliers.
Except it's
So,
not really science.
well, they're mathing for
They math.
sure.
Yeah, they math.
So if you look at this chart and you look at the very first column, it says polychlorinated biphenyls,
Biphenyls.
PCBs. Okay, so you've probably heard of PCBs. You probably know that they're super dangerous to our health. There are a lot of them at SSFL. There are over 300 contaminants of concern at SSFL, and a lot of them are very, very toxic, very hazardous, carcinogenic, dangerous to our health. And in the RIBSOLs, or the risk-based screening level documents, they list all the contaminants of concern, and they have amounts of these contaminants for different levels of cleanup. And what they have done is they have changed the standards of cleanup. So when we started this tonight, Melissa was talking about wanting the residential cleanup. We want a residential with garden cleanup that would be safe enough where you could grow food on your land parcel at your house and eat it. And the cleanup standard that's associated with that label of residential with garden, is supposed to be health protective enough to allow you to do that, to allow you to eat the food. But what they've done is they've messed with the cleanup standards, to put it in a nice way. They've messed with them, they've weakened them. So it's called the same thing. It's still called a residential with garden cleanup standard, but they have weakened it, and they're allowing higher levels of contaminants for that standard. And the way that they're doing that is through these multipliers. So if there is a non-biological area, they're using a 5 times multiplier, which means they're allowing 5 times the amount of contamination they originally would have allowed for that standard, and 100-time multipliers. I know it sounds crazy, but Committee to Bridge the Gap did this math. We didn't do this. Our scientific analysts over at Committee to Bridge the Gap did the math. They compared these risk-based screening levels across all the contaminants and did the math to see how much they were weakening them, how much they were, what kind of multipliers they were using. And so they are using a 5 times and 100 times multiplier across different areas of the site to determine how much contamination of each contaminant they will leave behind.
Can I add real quick?
Please.
No,
Yeah.
it's completely arbitrary. There's no justification for a 5 times or 100-time multiplier, except they wanted to. This is a cost-saving tactic that makes it excessively more dangerous for all of us, for the wildlife. And again, there's other documents we're going to show you of how you can learn more. If your brain isn't melted already, we've got plenty more ways to melt your brain, where it gets really deep into the science to show you the ways that Boeing has manipulated the formulas to make sure they can leave more contamination behind. Again, arbitrarily, nothing to do with science. This is a cost-saving tactic.
But if you were to talk to folks at DTSC or at Boeing, they would tell us, oh, well, we are implementing a residential with garden cleanup at certain CMS areas or corrective measure study areas on site. And they are, but it is not the same level of protectiveness. It is not as stringent as it was in 2015. But do you know how we showed you the maps earlier and we said they were in the PEIR, the Programmatic Environmental Impact Report? You could see the whole map, right? You could see the whole site and you could see what areas were shaded and what weren't, what they wanted to do. Well, this black square here on the right, this is what they just gave us at the end of 2025 in Boeing's Corrective Measure Study. Boeing's Corrective Measure Study is
But
the
Jenny,
plan.
Jenny, I can't see anything on that map.
I
It looks
know, just
black to
hold
me.
on, Melissa. The
Yeah.
Corrective Measure Study is Boeing's plan. It's the decisions that they have made of what they're going to do. And that black box right there shows what Boeing is planning.
You would think
And
that
they
this is a
published
joke.
it and redacted it because they don't want the public to see it. So the 3 full-size SSFL maps are all redacted in black. And the only thing they're going to let you see are the maps like the one on the left. This is a super zoomed in map of one specific area. CMS area is what they're called, Corrective Measure Studies area. And what you can see in this Corrective Measure Study area on the left is all these different colored shapes. They didn't choose to do a residential with garden or a recreational or an agricultural. They chose to do a bunch of stuff, put them all right next to each other.
At the same time. That's absurd.
And then
That's
some of it
crazy.
they've chosen not to remediate at all. And that's sitting right next to something that they are choosing to remediate. And what we've learned at the Santa Susana Field Lab that they deny, so they meaning Department of Toxic Substances Control and Boeing, is that contamination loose in the soil moves. So if you leave it over here at house number one, fantasy house number one, and you don't clean it up, nothing is keeping it from moving over the following decades into the remediated portion on block number two. Thanks for letting me go through that. So if you were looking at this map and you had all the time in the world and you had no hobbies,
Ah,
and you wanted to say, hey, what was the contaminated part in that big brown part, or what existed in the blue part that they don't want to remediate? If you wanted to find that out and you went back to the Corrective Measures Study document, you would find a chart where all of these areas are labeled differently and there's no way to cross-reference them. So I can't tell you what is at STL Rec ESO S22 because it's labeled something different in the chart that says what contamination and how much of that contamination is in each area. They're labeled differently.
you would think that this wasn't coming from a government agency, but it is.
It should be illegal.
This should be illegal.
Yeah.
This is ridiculous. Okay. So again, we promised if you wanted more brain melting information, we'd have it for you on broken promises. This is was made with our technical advisor, Dan Hirsch, when he was still with us. And it really gets into the basis of how we are where we are now with the settlement agreement. So if you need charts, if you need maps, if you need to see the math, the science, it's all there for you. And you can find that on our YouTube channel. Current news. I don't know if you heard, but Parents Against Santa Susana Field Lab, along with Physicians for Social Responsibility of Los Angeles and Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility, we call them PEER, we sued DTSC and Boeing for the changes in an agreement instead of having that background, I'm sorry, instead of having the residential with garden cleanup, they made changes in something called a settlement agreement that was done against the law. California environmental law. That's what CEQA stands for. And they did not follow the correct steps. We talked to several lawyers who said this was a hands down case. It was so clear that CEQA was violated, that they did not go about the settlement agreement properly. It changed it from a very thorough cleanup to one that will leave almost 95% of the contamination on site. And we lost. We lost recently, early this February. Even though all the judges said it was so clear what had happened. That was a hard blow. That was a really hard blow because again, if you hear the urgency in our social media posts lately, this is a big reason why. Our tools have been dramatically reduced for putting things right again once we lost this lawsuit. But again, don't give up hope. We've got a plan. It just doesn't look quite as straightforward as we had imagined it would be.
If you've ever been in a DTSC meeting or a responsible party meeting pertaining to the SSFL, and you've heard someone from those meetings say, contamination at SSFL doesn't come off site, and if it does, it doesn't come off site in amounts that are going to be that are going to affect people's health, please raise your virtual hand.
Oh, there you go.
Because we hear them say it over and over and over again, and then we yell at them and tell them they should be held legally liable because people in the surrounding communities are indeed getting sick. But in Boeing's Corrective Measure Study, they put it into print. They list all the ways that contamination can move through the air, the water, and potentially migrate off-site. But if you look at the potential off-site migration box, it goes nowhere. They are putting into print in this chart, and if you look at the bottom left yellow box and the pointed arrow that goes to the right, it goes to a white blank box. They're saying there is no possibility of contamination to migrate offsite, and therefore it cannot impact us. And that is the basis of their crappy cleanup plans. That wasn't a bad word. That was a medium bad word.
What happened to our list of all the ways that, oh, maybe that's different. We have a chart. We're going to show you guys a slide that shows all of the studies that have definitively proven that the contamination does go offsite and it is harmful to the community and to the environment. So
So
we'll get
Boeing made this chart. They made the document, the CMS document, and that was submitted to DTSC. And DTSC had an opportunity to push back and make comments. And geology and engineering, they all made, and the water board, they all made comments. They all had questions. They demanded that Boeing explain some of the outrageous stuff in this 2,000+ page document. Go to the next slide. But toxicology did not push back against that last statement. They said that they don't have any specific comments on the CMS related to human health and ecological risk assessments, but they covered their butts by adding that that should not be interpreted as agreement with Boeing's recommendations, granting or not granting exception areas.
But this is the regulating agency. That's what they're supposed to do.
DTSC is supposed to enforce the cleanup. They're supposed to enforce a health protective cleanup, and that's their mandate. And their toxicologist, Dr. Hanley, took a pass and refused to push back against Boeing's assertion that there are no pathways for contamination to migrate off-site and impact human health.
Yeah, shameful.
Grr.
Shameful. Oh, here it is. This is just a quick list. Again, you can find this all on our website. These are all different lists, different studies that were done by independent scientists. That means they weren't paid by Boeing. If you look at a Boeing study, they can't find the source of contamination. I've actually, and I know I'm not the only one, several of you have been at that same meeting where we've gone on tours of the Santa Susana Field Lab. Obviously, I'm wearing, my gear to stay safe. They will tell you to your face, oh, we can't seem to find the source of all the contamination here at the Santa Susana Field Lab. The scientists say that because they are paid to say that. These are independent scientists. Some of these are federally funded studies, and not shocking, they found a lot of contamination. Even Cal EPA sister agencies like the Water Board and the Air Board repeatedly fine. Like here, you can see that Boeing total fines for polluting local waterways. That's a Cal EPA agency. Boeing's been fined over, $1.5 million for contamination coming off site that is dangerous to human health. But DTSC will not say that. It is, I don't know. Sometimes it just feels very Orwellian, Denny, I think this one's yours.
Oh, good. This is my life right now, this part. So the Corrective Measures Study, we didn't talk about this. This is basically the precursor to the decision document, which is the documents that DTSC publishes about this document. And this CMS document, again, is Boeing's plan of what they're going to do and what they're not going to do. And then the main issues from our perspective is that there are 5 things that, as we've just covered in depth, it's allowing Boeing to leave most of the contamination on site. But the contamination that they are planning on remediating, they're estimating out the gate that 85% of it, almost all of it, is going to be non-hazardous and suitable for deposition at the Simi Valley Waste Management Facility. We're going to get to in a minute how they get to that, and I'll give you a hint. It's through their waste classification methodologies, how they're determining what is waste and what isn't. And another huge issue in terms of the actual excavation cleanup is how they're determining when they've gotten all of the contamination out of the ground. That is done through a process called confirmation sampling, which is supposed to confirm whether or not there is still existing contamination in that spot. That area in this cleanup plan is very, very troubling. So how did they get to decide that 85% of the soil is going to be non-hazardous? Well, there is in the Appendix G of the CMS cost estimate documents where they list all the costs of everything that they're going to use for supplies and trucks and tests. And they just, at the top, they just simply estimate. It almost sounds like a disclaimer. And that is it right there where it says it's assumed that all non-rad soil will be 85% non-hazardous. And again, these are screenshots from the document, so you know that we're not making up the plan to dispose of it in Simi Valley and other municipal landfills. Next slide. The way they get to that, this is a screenshot of which you can't really see, but this is the cost estimate sheet. There's a little byline, and it talks about waste characterization. And we think that this is how they're getting this estimate. Because their waste characterization or the way that they're sampling the waste to determine whether or not it's hazardous is they're taking one sample per every 150 cubic yards. That is a football field and a half both ways. That is essentially 10 to 14 truckloads of soil, one sample. We think that that isn't sufficient and it's equivalent to not really looking.
And that will allow hazardous, it's similar to the LA fires. They said it was non-hazardous.
Because they
And
weren't
so,
looking.
and because they declared it to be non-hazardous, it had nothing to do with science, it had nothing to do with testing. It was a declaration. That is what Boeing is doing here. And it will send hazardous waste and hazardous soil, toxic
Or
soil.
underclassified, potentially hazardous.
Right. Because if they say it's non-hazardous, then they're allowed, and the DTSC agrees with it, they are allowed to send it to CME landfill. We've been told twice now, like, oh, but CME said it doesn't accept hazardous waste.
And Melissa will kill me if I spend more than 15 seconds on this, but on the state level, DTSC has just published their hazardous waste management plan for the whole state, and this is exactly what they're doing. They're saying that they're going to reduce hazardous waste going to landfills, not by source reduction, but essentially by deregulatory efforts such as weak sampling.
Yep. Yep.
Thanks. Is that 15 seconds?
Yep. It was good.
Okay. And this is the reason why we know that they're absolutely wrong in their estimations. The other way that the state of California determines what's hazardous is not is through their Code of Regulations, Title 22, Division 4.5, Chapter 11, Appendix X. Okay, Appendix X lists all the materials that are classified as hazardous, toxic, and extremely hazardous. SSFL has a list of contaminants. We have over 300 contaminants of concern, or COCs, and a ton of our contaminants are on that Appendix X. The Appendix X is not being used to decide if the waste is hazardous. This sample of one in every 150 cubic yards is. But if we were to apply this Appendix X presumption, we would be assuming that most of SSFL contamination was hazardous because we have 96 contaminants at SSFL that by Appendix X are considered hazardous, 78 are considered toxic, and 38 are extremely hazardous. All of these should be presumed because we know that they're there. We know that that's what we should be targeting. That's what is supposed to be carried away in these trucks. If they were to apply Appendix X, we would not be assuming that most of it was not hazardous.
And again, this is not in barrels. This is not in vaults. This is not even necessarily even under tarps. This is what is loose in the soil at the Santa Susana Field Lab that Boeing is planning to leave behind to save money. So remember how we showed you that map and we said that they are misusing the exemptions? DTSC has approved 289 exemptions, and they're huge amounts of land. Um, and again, in my other video that we published last night, the 101 video, we talk about those exemptions more carefully. But I just want to point out two quotes real quick, is that Dr. Frank von Hippel is a very well-renowned ecotoxicologist, and he said, if it's not safe for people, it is not safe for much of the wildlife, right? So that's a misuse of they're claiming they have to have an exemption because the cleanup will harm animals, it will harm cultural resources. Well, Dr. Frank von Hippel is saying that no, actually, toxic soil is bad for animals. Tevin Schmidt, who is a water scientist for the Wish-Chumash Foundation, said contaminants associated with SSFL have caused immense harm to the natural cultural resources and made it unsafe for local Native community members to partake in traditional gathering and ceremonial practices. So Boeing and the Department of Toxic Substances Control claim that they have to leave the soil unremediated. They have to leave it there to protect all these important things. And that is being contradicted by scientists who are saying that the toxic and radioactive contamination at the Santa Susana Field Lab is dangerous. It is bad for them. It is not helping. And that, again, this is a cost-saving method. This is not out of the goodness of their heart. We have more videos for you if you'd like to learn more about the biological and cultural resources. You can find them on our YouTube channel. And again, we go into them in more depth, and you'll see they're actually not very difficult to understand. It's pretty common sense, but it just kind of takes some getting through. And it matters to me. I spent a little time on this more than I should have because I care about the environment. I love animals. I love wildlife. Obviously cultural resources are must be protected. And we wanted to let you guys know that in the cleanup plans that there are protections put into these cleanup plans to make sure that the wildlife and the cultural resources are protected. And this again, the exemptions are a misuse. They're giant loopholes. Jenny?
Where are we? We are at the issues of groundwater. So one of, what we've been talking about is the idea if you leave contamination in place, it remains available to migrate off-site. But the other issue is on the underneath part. If you don't take it off from the bottom, there's still potential for it to contaminate the groundwater source. At the top of the town hall tonight, Melissa was talking about, there's been statements issued that they are never going to use the groundwater, but none of us here can say for certain what the strain or demand on resources will be generations from now. And so that's why this is of a huge concern. I don't want my grandkids, great-grandkids, great-great-grandkids drinking contaminated SSFL groundwater by necessity. And I'm sure you feel the same. So in the CMS, the water board also explained in multiple places, actually, concern about impacts to groundwater with overuse of the exemptions. So there has been some pushback, but ultimately, a good portion of the exceptions were granted by DTSC. So the impacts to groundwater for the areas that are not going to be remediated are still very much a concern.
Oh boy, everybody take a deep breath. We're not going to panic because this looks like scientific vomit.
I guess the takeaway here is, we've been fighting over cleanup standards because we wanted to know what the risks were going to be to people living around the site. And that's why we were, all fighting for a background remediation standard or a residential with garden cleanup standard, because I assumed, I guess I can't speak for everyone in this room has been doing this work, but that means that standard would have been applied across the site. What we can see here is that is not the case. The brown is an ecological standard, and the purple is a residential standard, and the crosshatch means they're not going to do it. There's no way, um, to my understanding or to our understanding at this point, that we're going to be able to assess the risks post remediation of this land. I guess that's the most simple way I can say it.
Yeah. This, to our understanding, was never supposed to happen, that this breaks all the cleanup agreements.
Look at all the parcels side by side and understand that they're confirmation sampling. This is the way they're going to confirm that the excavation is done in every given little circle, oblong shape here. The way that confirmation sampling is supposed to be done is you sample where you've been digging to see if you are at clean dirt yet. What they are allowing themselves to do is to take samples from an adjacent parcel. You can go to the next slide.
Well, and we'll get into that more, but just remember this map, this patchwork quilt. And if one part is being cleaned up to residential with garden and the next part next to it is being not cleaned up at all, and then they take samples from the part that did cleaned up more, and they're allowed to say, well, both parts got cleaned. Do you see the mess? It's actually this. It is a nightmare.
And it was super sneaky the way that they did it, because they didn't even come out and say it outright in the corrective measures study. They said, see the settlement agreement for discussion of confirmation sampling. And I have to admit that I was so lazy, I had to read that 3 or 4 times before I said, fine, I'll go look. And to my dismay, what it said was that confirmation sampling may use previous soil samples or combine samples from contiguous CMS areas. And we now understand that these contiguous sites, these areas that are right next to each other, are not going to be cleaned up to the same standards. So there are loopholes upon loopholes upon loopholes that we need to push back against.
That's why when people ask me how the cleanup, how's it going? Where are we at? I say that Boeing has killed it. It's been a death by 1,000 paper cuts. These are just one of many, many, many paper cuts. And I bet everyone's kind of getting that impression right now. It's just from every angle. They're doing things. Even one of these would have been scandalous, but again and again and again, they're cutting corners. Solutions. This is the happy part. Hopefully you guys are still with us. I really appreciate everyone hanging in there. I know it's a lot. We're going through it fast, but this is what we're trying to prevent. We're trying to prevent Cancer Town. Nobody wants to live in Cancer Town. In fact, I posted on social media. I really offended a lady, but I was like, you know what? We have to understand this is the true risk of what we are looking at, that all of the communities surrounding the Santa Susana field that will permanently be contaminated. The cancers will not stop. They will not go away. They're not even probably going to lessen because the contaminants at the Santa Susana field lab, many of them are very long lasting, what we call persistent chemicals. Things that we need to do. We need to up our public outrage. It is time to be outraged. We've been watching this cleanup for decades, kind of moving at a snail pace of cleanup agreements and studies and revisions and whatnot. And now it's happening. Shovels in the dirt this summer. If we do not make it change, we will lose the cleanup. We need street teams. We need people printing out these flyers, posters, putting them around. Parenting in Santa Susana Field Lab has zero budgeting money right now. Budgeting money. Sorry, it's really been a long day.
Budget.
Marketing money,
Budget.
advertising money. Like we are very limited right now, and it is going to have to be the power of the people to get the word out to help people realize that this is the timeline. Similarly, we need volunteers to show up. We want to do, pardon me, you know, uh, tabling events, farmers markets, showing up at the beach, whatever it takes, but we need people to do that, again, to help get out the word. So one of the solutions that is probably our best bet, but again, will not happen unless there's true public outrage. And we are going to take some questions and answers of your guys' ideas of how to help generate that, especially as the world is a dumpster fire right now and we're all exhausted. How to make this become a priority because of the timing. We can't wait anymore. The city of Simi Valley, the city of Los Angeles, Ventura County, and Los Angeles County have all passed motions to sue if the cleanup was weakened. And it has been. In fact, it has been for a while. And I think that the counties and the cities are very hesitant, even though they said they would sue Boeing. And I don't think they want to. And Boeing has so much influence that, again, we're going to have to get really loud to put enough pressure on our elected officials to get them to actually sue DTSC and Boeing. That is probably the only chance we really have of getting things right. And it may be one of the most difficult things we have. We have been targeting elected officials for years. And we've been in their offices, we've given them updates, and they'll shake our hands. They're very friendly, they're very nice. They'll sign our letters. They'll sometimes do, news conferences with us, press conferences, but to get them to actually sue Boeing, that's a whole new step and a whole new commitment that we need them to take, and we need help. We have to put enough pressure on our elected officials to even out with Boeing company's pressure. So they're afraid they're going to get sued and lose their seat if they sue Boeing, but they need to be equally as afraid that if they don't sue Boeing, they're going to lose their seat because they're not going to get reelected. So that's why we are going to be targeting our elected officials. We have them all listed out on our website, the elected officials that are a special target. These are two I'm just showing from Los Angeles County. We've got the Ventura County elected officials on there, their emails, their social media. We need to, all of us need to go after them. And when I say all of us, I mean like we have thousands of supporters on social media. We have thousands of people on our email list. We need all of those people to really get involved and activated in order to make this happen.
We need all of you.
Mm, we do, and it's going to be hard, and I know that. It's a hard time right now. Board of Supervisors meetings, we need to start showing up in person and making them uncomfortable, and we need to be on the record. And if you would like to go with us, we will help you with a comment if you need. We'll help, support you, make sure you feel comfortable with that if that's a new action for you. Jenny.
That's what I was going to say. If you've never gone to a Board of Supervisors meeting before or a city council meeting, and they don't have to be these long, glorious, flowery statements, they only give you a minute or two in the first place. It's literally about making the trip, letting them see your face, and letting them hear that you expect them to litigate as they promised.
And we'll even sit next to you in the meetings. We're very friendly. This is the meetings coming up for the Los Angeles Board of Supervisors. However, I will say that we may do more of these virtually because Board of Supervisors puts the public comment period at the very end of the meeting. It means that you have no idea how long that meeting is going to go, um, unless you have a whole day to spend in downtown LA. We tend to do these meetings virtually. All right, are you ready for some real solutions? I don't know about you,
Yes.
but as a resident, I'm concerned about dust getting into my community and into my environment and into my home where my kids could breathe it. And we are concerned that Boeing, they've been cutting corners through the cleanup itself. We absolutely do not think that they're going to do gold standard mitigation measures during the cleanup. We think
Well,
they're
to
going to
be
want to
clear,
save
we
money.
we know that they aren't because we've asked and they've said that that's not how they do it.
In the past from
Yes.
DTSC. Yeah,
Yes.
And Boeing was involved. So we've gone to bat with them before. This again is going to take huge community outreach and outrage to get them to pay for some of these better methods that will ensure our safety.
One of the major things that we're going to push for is just improve soil classification. You can't classify what you haven't evaluated. You're not going to find what you're not looking for. And Simi Valley does not need a bunch of hazardous waste going into our municipal waste site. So we are going to push, and we are asking for your help to push um, for DTSC to tighten up their soil classification processes and be open to the areas that they say they're not going to clean up. We're not going to just accept that. We would like them to at least open up their minds to the idea of bioremediation, cleaning it up in place in more natural ways, even if it takes a little bit longer. Let's not just leave things, let's not accept doing nothing.
Right. Especially if there's better technology that can do it even more carefully.
And we want those soil confirmation samples to be split and sent to an independent lab
mhm.
of the community's choice
Yep.
on the RP's dime.
Yep. Again, this is all going to cost them more money. That's what they don't want to do. They Boeing wants us to think that we are not allowed to demand these things, that we are not powerful enough. And that is not true. When we work together, we have every right to demand safer, and more comprehensive methods. Construction tint with a HEPA filter, that's just common sense, right? When we took this to elected officials to show them our ideas for cleanup mitigation, they all said these were actionable, these were reasonable, um, and they've been used at other sites, at other toxic and hazardous waste sites during cleanups. There's no reason why they can't go in for construction tints with HEPA filters to ensure there's no dust, fugitive dust. Okay. I'm going to go in really fast. I know a lot of people here care about trucks and the trucking system. We don't have time to get through it all today, but I put it all here so you can come back and read it later. Currently, the Woolsey Canyon Road remains DTSC's preferred option for the trucks from the cleanup. That is because it is the quickest, it is the easiest, and it is the cheapest. That does not mean that it is the best, and there are other options. So again, I just put this on here for you, looking at some of the other options. There's other truck routes that they could use that would take trucks off of the main road further away from residents during the cleanup. They can use a covered pipe system, which is like a conveyor belt. They even looked at two different paths where this one goes through Edison Road. And again, you'll see that it is circumventing all of these homes and businesses. And then there's a second alternative that they were looking at, again, that goes past and away from all of these homes. This one goes directly to rail, which would be, again, then you wouldn't even have the trucks on the freeways. And they had an aerial conveyor system as well. So again, you can come back through and read these. We're going to have one sheets for you guys real soon that has all this information, very accessible. We just have to demand it. That is the difference. If we don't, if we stay quiet, we get the Woolsey Road. And we're looking for in transparency and compliance. We're asking for the DTSC to provide a community monitor who can be on site. We won't be allowed to do that. We can't be there. This community monitor could. They could have a camera. They could do independent air monitor readings. That I think would build a lot of confidence. Also, Jenny, I'm just running through these real quick. We're looking at confirmation sampling. Jenny's talked about several times about why this is so important to ensure our safety. So air monitoring program, we're super excited about this. We have already been working with UC Davis and USC to put up our own air monitoring system. You can see Jenny there. She's was helping install that in Bell Canyon. And this will be a way for the public to go online during the cleanup and actually see if the air is being polluted by the Santa Susana Field Lab during the remediation. Boeing's air monitoring is not going to be sufficient. We already know that. We've had confirmation from experts looking at their data. This will be safe. This will be good data that we can use to fight back if we see any pollution coming into our community. All right, this is our contact information. Please feel free to contact us with more questions. All right, well, thank you, everybody. Again, we really appreciate your patience to get through this.